Hello, welcome to Manny B, and welcome to the year of our Lord 2023. And let's hope it is as good as the last one, and maybe even better. Who knows? Um, Enough of that small talk. I am heading back into my deconstruction of a podcast that Stefan Molyneux did on his own philosophy series on the history of philosophers, and after 16 parts, he sort of started to loathe his own series, and that's what I've been sort of deconstructing because it's sort of a general approach thing we have he's sort of dealing with here, right? And it's not sort of a small, but it's in a general thoughts he potentially has about philosophy and philosophers in general. So that's why I'm sort of digging into it, right? But as I pointed out, it rather comes across to me as a planned thing where he's supposed to sort of, okay, look at all these bad philosophers from 2000 years until now, and they can't come up with a good moral principle. Look, I wrote a book 17 years ago about UPB, and all the Christians like it, so should you, right? They're too stupid. They're out to get you. You should read my book on UPB on morality, right? That's how it comes across to me. It's um, it's sort of a half-ass snake oil salesman, the used car salesman trick, sort of. You there's sort of this general sense of being manipulated, and when I look back on when I started to listen to Stefan Molyneux many years ago, actually more than a decade ago, certainly more than a decade ago, right? So in the later years, it has been on off, right? In the early years when I started, I've listened very much to him, right? But he has become constantly, consistently more and more sophist in his approach, right? And as I pointed out several times, or a few times at least, it seems that he keeps contradicting his own philosophy. Every time he comes up with some new stuff, it's sort of a contradiction of some old stuff, right? And I mean, when does this end? Right? What do you see? What is it about? Well, what I think it's about, he's frustrated that nobody is sort of pointing out, hey, look at that fantastic philosophy this dude from Canada over there has made. Go read his perfect book on perfect philosophy. It's the holy grail of philosophy. Finally, right? Nobody. If anybody, people are asking questions about what do you mean by universally, and what do you mean by preferable, and what is a behavior, and I have sort of taken the deep dive, so to say, and deconstructed half of his proof in his book UPB, sentence by sentence, basically, with a few where take a big step, right? But all the important parts of the first part of the book, which is sort of proving whatever it is he's trying to prove, and it sucks. Like, I mean, it's pathetically bad philosophy, right? Now he might have some good stuff in his head. I can't know that, but what is on paper there, it's ridiculously bad, right? So he's frustrated that nobody they can't see his brilliance, right? So he's using all sorts of tricks in order to get somebody to something like that, right? There must be somebody out there who understands how great I am, right? The problem is he's not a good philosopher. He's a crappy philosopher. There are certain things when he has sort of ideas of approaches to various aspects of life, which I think you could learn a good deal from, right? He has been thinking about, what it means to live a good life and so on for multiple decades longer than I have, right? At least in a philosophical manner, as far as I understand from what he says. And there's a good sort of everyday things that you could possibly use from his, right? There's a lot of things that, peaceful parenting, and taking your parents seriously. If they beat you, why shouldn't you beat them? Basically, when you get old, right? Tooth for a tooth and an eye for an eye. If you have this principle, why shouldn't I follow the same principle when I get old and you get older? And this kind of stuff. It's sort of this universal thinking, right? If you have the rule, why can't I treat you by the same rule that you have presented to me, right? So this kind of thinking is decent, right? So you might end up with some conclusions that you might not have come up with because you sort of soaked in propaganda and culture and sophistry, right? Fine. But when we get to the deep end of philosophy, right? That's what I am interested in. I'm basically not in. Yes, I said everyday tips on how to live your life. Fine, I can. There's a thing here and there, right? Yeah, fine. But what I'm really interested in is the deep end, right? Metaphysics, epistemology, objectivity, and ethics, right? In that order. And when he starts to do that sort of what must be rigid, he sucks. There's no rigidity, right? He basically, in every corner he turns around, it turns into a history lesson or a discussion of politics or a railing against these type of people or that type of people. Or that's not good philosophy. That's basically not philosophy, right? And sort of, and this is of the same sort of kind, right? He sort of rails against the clouds about all these philosophers back in history who have cheated you by making you think they have come up with something, and they're going for the big moral principle, and they haven't delivered, right? They suck, those philosophers. But he has apparently come up with it. Well, what I see is somebody claiming to have made a Tour de France level bicycle. And when he shows it to me, right, it's like a pile of rubble that might look like a wheel there and maybe a chain there, something like that, some rubber. And he says, look, it's the perfect Tour de France, bicycle, right? And I'm like, doesn't look like it to me, right? So, and you can go listen to, I've deconstructed 3 of his books: the UPP book, the Essential Philosophy, and the Art of the Argument. And I think there's a couple of more of his that are slightly philosophical in nature, but I think I've done the main course of Stefan Molyneux here, so I'm not going to, unless something interesting pops out, right, deconstruct further of his books. But I do want to keep deconstructing this, and there's still sort of 20 minutes left of this rant, or loathing. What's it says here? After I finished Blaise Pascal, I felt a near bottomless boredom, rage, and contempt. It's also this, and it's a recurring thing, right? He doesn't say, well, there's something that triggered me, or there's something that annoyed me. It has to be bottomless boredom, right? Rage and contempt, right? Contempt, right? Of the entire history of it's this kind of, I don't, what did you call it, right? Some mania, almost, right? There has to be 3 terms, right? Bottomless boredom and rage and contempt. It's not enough to say there's something that annoys me about this, right? It's sort of, it has to be compounded or amplified into, this rhetoric, and it's annoying. It's not something that, now, when I deconstruct these kinds of philosophers, all this and Keith Frankish and Bernardo Kastrup and others maybe I've done, and Stefan Molyneux, I sometimes get triggered by something they say because I really feel deep down that I'm being fucking manipulated, right? And it's sort of a natural thing that comes, and then, if you like it, fine. If you don't like it, too bad, right? And then go listen to another channel, right? Or just, step ahead fast forward, right? But I in the latest deconstruction in this series, part 4 in this, I had 100 and almost 200 views on it, and that's a big number on my channel. Let me tell you, right? It's been years since I had more than 100 listens on my video, right? So somebody has been listening in on this series for sure, right? So I am getting something somewhere. Somebody somewhere is listening, right? And I know that he's still sort of a somewhat known dude in this in the internet sphere, right? But nothing like what he was when he was back on YouTube or on Twitter and so on, right? 1 million viewers and 250,000 on Twitter, whatever, right? So he's by far not as known as he used to be, right? So he's basically shot himself in the foot, in my opinion, by jumping into all this Christian bullshit and politics and all this shit, right? Which is, first of all, his integrity has been destroyed, in my opinion, right? Nobody with integrity would do that. And he's Mr. Principles and First Principles and so on, right? And he created also these, there's a little niche for people over here. The theologians can sit there, right? And we will do philosophy over there. Oh, all of a sudden, this new category of philosophy appears, right? So it's, he sort of adjusts, so now he needs to have a bit of that. So he'll sort of find some sophist way of arguing. So now this can also be there, right? And this has been, as I said, prevalent the last 5 years or so, right? At least. And he needs to be sort of called out, in my opinion. And that's sort of what I'm basically trying to do here, right? But I'm taking the beaten path of the hardcore philosophy as best I can, right? With a little note here and there, right? But before I get further into a rant here, and also excuse me for the low lit picture of me here, right? I know I'm extremely good looking, but you will have to do with this, right? It's sort of a low lit Sunday afternoon in the northern hemisphere, and middle of southern Scandinavia, right? And I'm sort of saving on the light, and so this is what you get, right? Okay. And it's basically also what I have to say, not how I look, that you should be interested in, right? So then you will have to go to some other channel, right? Let's jump back into, and I think I winded 30 seconds back or so. So
don't hit, don't grab, don't lie. Don't hit, don't grab, don't lie. Honesty, respect for property, non-aggression.
Oh yeah, that was the thing, that children are told this. Okay, so why is this sort of magical? Because the parents who tell their children this, they have not done philosophy, right? They're doing it because they were told that. So it's sort of an infinite regression back in child rearing history, right? This does not make any good starting point for philosophy or ethics, if that's the case, right? So it's like, against this thing, he grabs it out of nowhere, sort of, there are people saying this, so therefore we must follow this. But other people saying some other stuff I don't like, we don't have to follow that, right? Or he has to use it as some kind of, If you have already experienced this in your childhood, you're more likely to say, yes, I guess he's right. But he's not arguing. He is Mr. Art of the Argument, right? And just grabbing something out of the blue. These people say this, so therefore I have to accommodate it in my philosophy. That's stupid. That's not an argument. That's not even philosophy. That's just hearsay, right? You have to start from some ground floor and work your way up. So you make sure you accommodate every fucking aspect of what it means to be a human being, right? You can't just grab, hey, some people over there said this to their children, so I'm working with it, right? Fuck off, man.
This is how children are raised. Physics has to oppose what we take for granted. UPB completely accepts what we're taught as children, and we're taught it as an absolute. We're not taught you can hit on Tuesday but not a Thursday. We're not taught you can steal when it's sunny but not when it's cloudy or in a particular location. We are told, don't hit, don't grab, don't lie. Are universal absolutes.
Yeah, just because somebody tells it to you doesn't mean it's absolute, right? I understand that they present it as if there are no getaways, there is no exit clauses, there are no, what's it called? Yeah, exit clause. There's no escape where they say, yeah, as you said, except on Tuesdays or something like that. Okay, but why doesn't he follow that himself, right? Because when I debated him, or quote, debated him right in his in our discussion on his channel, on his show about metaphysics, he started out by saying, well, we can't interrupt each other, right? Then we can't have a discussion if we interrupt each other, right? And at that point, there was no interruption. That was the rule. But then we get further ahead, he starts to yell at me and interrupt me. And then he said, but you did this, therefore I must interrupt you, right? So it's like, so all of a sudden he creates these exceptions. And that was the other word I was looking for just before, right? Exceptions. Oh, so he can create exceptions, right? So he's sort of violating the philosophy he is presenting here, right? But nobody, you don't remember that show he did with me 4 months ago, or however long it was, in August or September, something like that, right? You don't remember what he did there and compare it to what he does now. But that's what you actually should do, right? But, maybe I'm the only one doing that, right? Maybe this particular thing because I was a part of it and remember it very clearly. And I can see the hypocrisy in it, right? It sounds good when, universal, right? And he violates his own principle when he needs to because he doesn't give a shit, right? I mean, he has written these books that he finds to be the holy grail of philosophy, and, not 7 wild horses can change his idea that those books are perfect, right? So if people are not taking them seriously, quote, right, it must because they either too stupid to understand it, or they deliberately don't want it to take it on, right? It must be, there can't be any other reasons, right? It can't be because it's shitty philosophy, right? Because he's so far up his own ass, he can't see any flaws in what he's doing. And he's also sitting in that echo chamber. He's only listening to his own voice, right? And ask me anything. And then he basically, his little minions, can you tell me about your perfect life, Mr. Molyneux? Tell me about your perfect life and your perfect, wife and your perfect life and your perfect daughter. Everything is perfect. Tell us about it. Overlord, right?
So philosophy wouldn't be teaching anyone anything that they weren't taught as children.
Why does that follow? So because somebody was told something when they were children, all of a sudden that is the simple goal of philosophy. How do you make that connection? Well, you don't, because it's bullshit, right? You don't start with what some stupid parent told their children and saying, okay, I'm going to work from that in my philosophy, right? You don't do that. If you are right in your head, right? I know this is sort of it's an appeal to the lowest common denominator of the one-eyed king ruling the blind or something like that. I understand that. And that's possibly why he does it this way. And maybe also because he can't do good philosophy. He can't start from first principles, even though he uses that term and it sounds great and all that, right? He doesn't have any first principle. Give me some, right? Something that works in your everyday. What would that be? What is the ground floor of his metaphysics, right? His ground floor is something like reality is 100%, right? It's stupid, man, right?
They were taught these moral principles as universals. Philosophy says these moral principles are universals. Now, it can be a little tricky to come up with a syllogistical proof. I get.
There's no such thing as a syllogistical proof. I don't know where the hell he has dragged that out of his armpit or his asshole or where it comes from. Syllogisms are not proofs, man. Right? They are deductive reasonings, right? I don't know who the hell has told him that, right? Has he come up with that himself? A deduction is like Socrates is a man. No, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, right? The minor premise follows from a major premise because of a general rule, which is all men are mortal, right? All men are the major premise and mortal is the minor premise, right? And if you have a major premise, in some instance, the minor premise follows by nature, by the syllogism, right? Now, I'm not saying that necessarily syllogisms are a good philosophical standpoint, but there's something to it at least, right? There are problems with the syllogism, how people use them, but they're not completely invalid. You just have to be very careful of what it means to entail to be a syllogism, right? It is purely deducting some kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Not attitude. Attribute. An attribute of some object, right? If you have an orange, you have the taste of orange, right? If this is an orange, it tastes like orange, right? That's a syllogism. Oranges taste like oranges. This is an orange, therefore it tastes like an orange. It doesn't mean that you know that it tastes like an orange because you have to have the taste. But it's sort of you are deducing it from prior experiences, right? But you can't do philosophy this way, right? You can't prove anything by you can't take an object and then extract morality from it, right? That's the most stupid thing you can possibly say. It's so stupid that it's this next level stupid, right? It's out of scale. It's out of bounds, right? It's so ridiculously stupid that I can't find words to tell you how stupid it is, right? And he would probably say, I don't give a shit. I am right because universality and preferability, right? Oh, man.
Get that. Took me a while. But philosophy is not going against the moral instincts of mankind.
Why not? Do you have a moral instinct? What is that? Oh, yeah. I have an instinct that tells me I have to tell my children, don't grab. Right? Right? I had an instinct. What is that? Philosophical instinct, moral instinct, what is that? They're not instinct. They are, force-fed rules. Right?
It is fully accepting the absolute universals we were taught as children. So for the first 20 years of our life, we are taught these morals as absolute.
So what if you have children and don't teach them? Is that also okay? Because who says you have to do that? Where do these rules come from then, right? Philosophers? No. So maybe you should listen to the philosophers, because they didn't come up with stupid rules like that, right? They are sufficiently critical and skeptical about their own abilities to reach some kind of cohesive, very strict, you do this or don't do this or something like that, right? Maybe that is what is the takeaway about these philosophers, that there's a problem in the whole idea of doing this, maybe, right?
Absolutes and universals. So this is not saying to people, hey man, it looks like the sun goes around the earth, but in fact, the earth goes around the sun. Man, blows your mind. The earth looks flat, but it's round, man. It's crazy. The sun and the moon are totally different sizes. The sun is thousands of times bigger than the moon. The moon makes the tides go, man.
Yeah, but how do you know that? That's a theory, right? It's not something that can be known. And if you have to base ethics on some kind of knowledge, then all these astronomical arguments you're presenting here doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter with I can possibly steal a bicycle no matter whether the earth is round or flat or triangular or hexagonal or whatever, right? It doesn't really have any bearing on it. And what does it mean to steal? Yes, stealing, it means something that is acquiring some object or stuff in an immoral way, right? So what does it mean that it's immoral? How do you get to it, right? How do you experience it? Because if you can't experience it, it can never be objective, right? Things you can't experience in sort of a sensual and empirical manner cannot be objective. That should be obvious, right? So how do you get to it? But he constantly circles around these framing of what it means to be immoral, and what it means to be wrong, or evil, or all these terms that are used for sort of bad, right? Without pointing to how do you get to it, right? And nobody I have ever heard have ever pointed out how the hell you do it, right? Nobody. And that's why a guy like David Hume says, well, you can't do it this way, right? You can't just all of a sudden, because when they argue for this thing, what they do is they talk about stuff, and then all of a sudden, stuff and things that happen, right? Happens or happened, right? And then they all of a sudden switch into therefore you shouldn't, right? And this sort of artificial jump there. Hey, hang on. You can't just start to say out of nowhere, therefore you shouldn't. How does that follow from what happened and what existed now or in prior, right? In our memories. It doesn't follow that way, right? And nobody seems to be able to argue this. And he thinks he has done it somehow just by throwing around the terms immoral or evil or bad or whatever, right? Stealing is wrong? Yeah, of course it's wrong, because that's the definition of stealing. It's a wrong way of acquiring stuff. But the point is, you do not point out what it means to be wrong and how you get to it, right? And that's possibly why there had to be some kind of authority somewhere who just said, okay, this is when you do this, or they said you shouldn't steal. Okay, people try to guess how to avoid stealing, and then if they stole, these people who set those rules are hunting them down, right? And this is how it's been going since the dawn of time for human beings, and still works this way, right? So there's some fundamental problem in this, right? There's fundamental problem in thinking that you can experience immorality or morality for that matter, right? That's my point. There is a problem there, that we are trying to look for something that we can't find, right? That's the problem, in my opinion.
Okay, that stuff blows your mind. I get that, because that's kind of opposite from what we experience. But how is UPB?
maybe I should, rewind that a bit. We're trying to look for something in a way we can't get it. We have to get to it another way. Maybe I should say that. It started to sound like you can't get to any kind of morality. I don't think that's necessarily the case. But you can't do it by saying, I'm experiencing immorality over there, right?
At all the opposite of what we actually are told. We are told these morals are absolute and universal. So the philosopher says, okay, these morals are absolute and universal. Let's figure them out. And even if you are, or especially if you are Christian, where the morals are taught to you as absolute and universal, then unpacking the reasons behind why they're absolute and universal doesn't eliminate God, it reveals God, in the same way that studying physics does not eliminate God, but reveals God's handiwork. The philosophers have no excuse. Philosophers were told morality is absolute and universal. That's what they were taught as children for 20 years. It's not.
How the hell does he know that? Right? And why, again, as I said before, why is that the foundation of philosophy or morality? It isn't. I mean, maybe it is, but then you have to explain how you can't just grab it out of nowhere and say, hey, these people told their children this, and therefore this is the foundation of something, right? I don't buy that. That's simply stupid. That's not the kind of first principle workout you need to do in order to get to something in philosophy. You can't just grab what somebody tells their children, right?
Going against their sense data, it's not going against their experience, it's not going against what they were taught. It's listening to your elders and saying, oh, morality is universal and absolute. Boy, there's got to be a great reason for that. Let me figure out what it is. Boom, UPP. Philosophers have the easiest job of any mental discipline because all they're doing is harnessing everything that was said and enforced to and against children for decades and proving it. You know, if you have a penis...
What do you mean by proving it? I mean, how do you get to proving stuff in philosophy? Philosophy is a kind of thinking. It's not a proof. You can only prove things, I would say, mathematically, which are abstractions, or you can prove it by saying, hey, there's an elephant, right? Look, that's an elephant. That's a fact. Therefore, it's proven that that's something like that, right? We could work on that, right? But proving philosophy, it's like you can start with some words and some thoughts, and all of a sudden, poof, suddenly ethics pops out of... That's not how it works. Thinking you can get to some conclusions this way, as if sort of a mental gymnastics and a sort of cauldron of philosophy, and then woo, all of a sudden the egg of ethics pops out of it somehow, right? By some syllogism. It's ridiculous. It just goes to show how stupid and ignorant he is of what it takes to do good philosophy, in my opinion.
And then biology can tell you why you have a penis. That's not going against your instincts. That's just explaining something that you look down and see. If you have eyes that work, and then a biologist can tell you why your eyes work.
How do you know they work? And maybe you could go on with these kinds of statements. How do you know they work? Yes, I open my eyes and I have experiences, but is that working? How would I know? I have some colors and, some spatiality. Is that working? How would I know? I have nothing to compare it to, right? There's nothing except my prior experiences, but they were based on some, live experiences I didn't know whether or not was functioning, right? So that doesn't work either, right? So all these things sort of, it's like he doesn't even ask the question, right? It's as if everything is given to him and people are just too stupid. It's there, right? The syllogism, I made it, right?
Work? He's not going against your lived experience that your eyes work. He's simply explaining to you what you already know to be true. It's the same thing with morality. UPB simply explains to people what they always have been taught to be true.
Now that is fucking... So now crappy parents are supposed to be the base of morality, man, right? You didn't talk about that in... I mean, so maybe there was a hint at people's intuitions about morality. That's sort of that. I think I remember something along those lines. But actually, statements about don't grabbing, don't doing this, don't doing that, that's not how you do good philosophy, mate, right? You have to start with metaphysics and cover all bases to make sure that people understand that you understand it, right? You can't start your ethics book by, well, I don't have to run around and prove that, stealing is wrong or something like that. There is an actual statement on the first pages where he says this, right? We have a lot of work to do, so I don't have to do metaphysics or epistemology, right? Oh, man. I mean, that's how stupid his philosophy is, right? There isn't even a link or a hint or a reference to where you could go and get his metaphysics or epistemology, right? Something that is clear cut and fits with the book, the pace of the book or anything like that. It's just, I don't have to do it. Fuck you, man. If you think I have to prove that murder is wrong, there's something wrong with you. That's how he starts his fucking book on ethics, man. It's so stupid. It's unbelievable, right?
They've always known and accepted to be true. At least as children. Now I get this pushback and this blow. I understand all of that. In which case, shut the discipline down. Right? Shut the discipline down.
What is it? Are you going to threaten people in this and say, you shouldn't think, right? You shouldn't think about how you think, right? We are shutting it down. What is it? It's a lot of maniac words, right? It's like it's so easy to sit there in your echo chamber just throwing words in the wind, right? And all your blind congregation is oh, he must be so smart. He's yelling at the clouds. He must be philosophy Jesus. He's come to save us.
Because if what differentiates philosophy is morality, but philosophers refuse to pursue morality.
Differentiate from what? Everything is based on philosophy. You're not using philosophy when you're doing science, for instance, but in order to get to what it means to do science, you're doing philosophy, right? Everything is based on some kind of philosophy. That's why philosophy is so fucking important, because it is based on some kind of philosophy, or should be, right? If it isn't, it should be, right? If it is not, it's because there's some kind of interest somewhere that some people want to convince these people or threaten them into submission or something like that, rather than doing philosophy, right? But that doesn't mean they should have used philosophy instead and presented that philosophy and said, hey, this is how I arrived at this conclusion, right?
Because of cowardice. Don't talk to me about courage as a virtue. Don't talk to me about reason as a virtue. Don't talk to me about sacrifices. Don't talk to me about going against instincts. Don't talk to me about having a higher calling or a noble purpose. Don't talk to me about any of that stuff. Fine. Collapse your mind and survive. Like a mammal. Collapse your mind. Disembowel your reason in order...
So he's basically saying, if you don't eat my shitty ethics, you might as well just lay down and, crawl in the dirt, right? Because if you don't listen to my UPB, you are you're just a stupid monkey at best, right? And dirty schlock at worst. So this is sophistry, right? This is how he falsifies his fucking stupid philosophy, right? By threatening you or trying to convince you that all these 17 philosophers, however many there were, pre-Socratics and so on, they were basically manipulating everybody. And he's the new Jesus who's come to save everybody, and he has written the book, right? Version 1, still going after 15 years. Go read it. It's so brilliant, man, right? This is how he sells his shit.
To survive. I can live with that. You can live with that. Maybe that's the only way you can live. I get that. I'm not some big criticizing guy for that, but just be honest about it. I claim to be a philosopher, but it's impossible to...
I'm just thinking that why is it exactly here where we get to Hume, who wrote a book on morality? The treatise is basically a how to apply, scientific method. I'm paraphrasing, but Newtonian ideas to philosophy, right, of morality. And Immanuel Kant, and these people, right, who came up with the moral principle. Immanuel Kant did, right? Why is he doing? Why didn't he go through the whole thing and say, I don't have to do this rant now. I could actually finish my series if he actually had planned it. But maybe he's stopping just before he gets to these people because he can't explain it away, maybe. I don't know. I'm just, this list hasn't been expanded. The RSS.com here. It's still 19 parts, I think, right? So I'm sort of, this one is from December 6th. So it's more than a month. It's sort of 5 weeks or so since any new part in this series occurred. So he's probably not going to. He said, I don't have to do it because I have written the book, right? After 16 parts, I found out I'm the best one, right? Oh, man.
Do philosophy. It's impossible to be a philosopher. That's, I think, rational political analysis is not the time right now, I think.
No, but so all those who tried to build an aeroplane, right? And the people said, hey, it didn't work, right? So we don't need to go for airplanes because they have tried 16 times to fly and it doesn't work. They're idiots. Stop it.
For rational, productive political analysis, I'm not doing it. I was honest about that. I'm not doing it. Here's why.
Oh, you're honest about it. Oh, yes. You weren't particularly honest about why you all of a sudden started to do politics after 10 years of anarchy, right? Back when Ron Paul was the closest thing you could say to an anarchist. When he was running for president, there was no Stefan Molyneux going into politics there. But when that stupid orange man idiot comes into the show, all of a sudden, he's into politics, right? I mean, oh man. I mean, if he was my father, right? Or my brother or my friend or something, I would fucking ditch him, right? Because he's obviously manipulative, right? He has no sense of integrity. And he relies on his sophist abilities in order to argue for whatever, right? It's actually what he does. He's a sophist. He's not a philosopher, right? He's somebody who uses words to get what he wants. He doesn't give a flying crap about good ethics or good philosophy or good metaphysics, right? If it hasn't dawned on you yet, and you have been listening to him for a while, I mean, it's like, then you're fucking too stupid to see it, right? That's because you don't want to see it. He's awful at philosophy.
And I'm not doing it. But I'm not saying I'm a political analyst, while political analysis I also consider impossible. That's what's driving me nuts about these guys. They were all taught property rights, non-aggression, all taught that as children.
Yes, Heraclitus, he was taught by his mummy that he shouldn't grab stuff. I've heard it. And therefore, he should be able to see it and universalize it. I mean, where does he get stuff like this, right? He's pulling words out of his ass. He's just coming up with stuff, right? And he possibly have a feel-good sensation in himself. I think this is going to work. I can manipulate words and get away with it, right? I can convince people. I can keep pissing on them with left and right, and my integrity is like, on the level of a leaf blower or something like, right? It's actually better for a leaf blower because it doesn't do philosophy, right? Be careful with philosophers, people who claim to have come up with all the solutions. Be fucking careful with them. It's very likely they have no clue what the fuck they're doing, right?
You grab your brother's toys. Don't grab toys. Let him have it. Let him use it. It's his toy. Property rights. Don't hit your sister. It's bad. It's wrong. Non-aggression.
Well, what is it that is bad? Point to the badness. Explain the badness. You can't say, that is red, that is green, that is a circle, that is circular, that is square, and then that is bad. That's different, right? That's red, that's sour, that is green, that is roundish, right? All things that is obviously experiential. But then badness? How do you look at an apple and say that's bad? Is it only something that is surrounding an aura around human beings sometimes that you say, oh, there it is, badness, right? How do you get to it, moron, right?
Aggression. Who broke this lamp? Tell me the truth. Don't lie. Do not lie to me. Honesty is a virtue.
Well, because your parents say so? How did they get to it? Did they do some philosophy, right? If you are the Socrates, the new Socrates 2.0 of philosophy, why are you listening to some average parent, what they're spouting to their children in order to control them? It's stupid, man.
So, people would rather try and figure out the cause of a rainbow than a rational explanation of the morals they accept and proclaim. Well, what's really important is the mathematical spiral of conic geometrical shapes. Really? Can a brother get a proof of property rights? No! Can we universalize the morals we were always told were universal? No! Can we make absolute the morals we were always told were absolute? No!
Because you shouldn't listen to what you're told. That's the first step, right? If you have listened to Socrates, isn't the takeaway you should, examine your life and weed out all the bullshit you were told, right? The first step is a blank slate, get rid of all of it, right? And start from afresh. If you have just been told stuff, that is not philosophical. That is authoritarian, right?
No! And a hell no! Can't do it, won't do it, pretend to do it, won't talk about it. Boom. Sophistry 101.
Mr. Sophistry himself tells everybody that they're sophist. Yeah. Of course, you accuse the quote opponent for what you want to get away with, right? If he says they're sophist, people are going to think implicitly that of course he isn't, because he's the one pointing out they are, right? He's a star sophist man, right? He's screwing around with you.
It's like a Ponzi scheme. What is the good? What is virtue? Why be virtuous? That's the gig. That's the job.
Yes, what is the good? What do you
It's just
mean
about
by
the first
the
thing
good?
I worked
Right?
on as a public.
What do you mean by the good? What is it? If people say that is bad, they must be pointing to something in that external reality, right? They're not pointing to something in their own minds, because then it's just their opinion, right? And we can't agree upon their opinion, or whatever it's based on, their emotional whatever, right? So if you're pointing and saying that is bad, it's something that can be objective and be experienced. Otherwise, it can't be objective, right? So how do you do that? What color does it have? What sound does it have, this kind of badness, right? How the hell do you get to it?
Public philosopher, proving libertarian morality. LouRockwell.com, 2005. It was my breakout session, proving libertarian morality. Followed relatively quickly by the more formal proofs of UPB, followed relatively quickly by the presentations, the speech.
Oh, the formal proof. Oh, yes, it's a formal proof. It's beyond dispute. It's beyond criticism. It is there, and it has been done, right? Don't have to look into it. It has been going on 15 years, and people don't buy it. They don't work from it. They don't understand it, and they are criticizing it left and right. And everybody's saying it's a piece of crap, right? All that I've heard, except for his fans, some of his fans, right? Who apparently are too ignorant to understand what the hell he's actually doing, right? It is the most ridiculously badly argued philosophy I've ever read, right? It's so unbelievably stupid, man, right? And that he pushes this without saying, I might need to go back to the drawing board and try once again, and actually maybe do as I'm claiming I should do. Work from first principles, right? Work from metaphysics up, right? Do some groundbreaking good metaphysics, then groundbreaking good epistemology, and then an extremely clear definition of what you mean by objective or true or something like that, right? Knowledge. And then go into some fucking harebrainedly simple and clean and beautiful ethics that amounts to a moral principle that is so obvious that everybody can understand it and use it in their everyday without any problems, right? Now that's what you need to do.
Speeches, the proofs, the debates, the arguments, the book. Because that's the gig, man. I hated the con men in the software industry. Hated them. Because they corrupted the field for everyone and lowered.
So all these philosophers are con men? I mean, what? So, okay, they didn't come up with something that looks like UPB, and that's why they're all trying to con you, right? Control you. And I have done it. I wrote UPB. There should be some UPB in a Library of Alexandria, maybe, right? And it has been, it has been forgotten. It has been burned down or whatever, right? And I've rewritten it, so to say, right? And in 500 years, people are going to make universities in my name because I'm the greatness incarnate, right?
The standard for everyone, or tried to. Don't promise what you can't deliver. Don't claim you have features you don't have. Don't claim you have integration capacities you don't have, or at least aren't automatic. Don't lie. Don't steal. It's kind of theft, I think. Why would I be satisfied or settle for that in the most essential field of human thought? Morality, which is philosophy. See, people say moral philosophy. That's all there is. It's the philosophy of science. Well, it's just the scientific method. It's just reason and evidence applied to science. But reason and evidence applied to morality, that's philosophy. That's philosophy.
No. You don't use evidence to do philosophy, right? In fact, you need to use philosophy in order to identify why you needed the idea of evidence and what you mean by evidence. You're putting the horse behind the cart here, right? Reason and evidence. Philosophy is a kind of thinking that enables you to have a qualified description of what you mean by reason and evidence, right? You don't use that to get to philosophy or do philosophy. It's ridiculous, man. You are completely oblivious to what it actually means to do philosophy.
I've done 1.5 dozen of these dudes. How tough was it? How tough was it for them to say, hey, let me prove that stealing is wrong. Let me prove it.
Yes, I can do that in about 1 minute, right? Stealing means a wrong kind of acquiring stuff, right? So when I say stealing is wrong, I'm actually saying a wrong kind of acquiring stuff is wrong. So I made a tautology. So therefore I have proven that the statement, right? Yes, it's tautological. You're actually not proving anything. But if that's what you're going with, that's your proof. You're just stating the obvious, right? The trick is to point out, what do you mean by wrong and how do you get to it, man?
Nah, we'll prove God. Let the priests handle that. Why? Many priests would have welcomed UPB as many Christians have welcomed UPB. God gives you rational rules and gives you the reason to understand them.
Don't give me that fucking God shit, man, right? That religious bullshit. Now you're trying to rally Christians to eat your shitty philosophy because they are used to shit philosophy in the first place. So they are possibly going to eat your shit sandwich, right?
You study a painting because you love the painter. If you study to imitate a painter, it's because you respect that painter. You want to emulate that painter. You love that painter. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And analysis, in general, is the sincerest form of praise.
Okay, so is a deconstruction a kind of praise? Not to me, right? I'm trying to point out shitty philosophers, right?
Even if you're analyzing to critique, you're saying it's important enough to analyze.
Okay, I think I'll stop here. We are getting close to the 1 hour mark of recording, right? Time flies when you're having fun, right? Sorry, I'm completely black. You can't see me waving here. I'm actually completely naked. You just can't see it, right? Just kidding. You don't have to blow up your screen with the highest level of gain to check if I'm sitting here in my birthday costume, right? Please share, like, and subscribe. Give me a comment. What do you think about what the hell he's doing here? Is my critique warranted, or do you think there's some holes in it? And please consider donations. Links in the description and possibly in the Discord server. There are links to crypto donation and so on. Otherwise, see you in the next one.